Hello, and welcome to Classics You Slept Through, the podcast about classic books that maybe you haven't read. I'm your host, Kyle Davis, along with my sister Meredith.
Hey there.
And today, we're going to learn about being a bug as we start Franz Kafka's Metamorphosis.
The Metamorphosis.
Oh, a Metamorphosis. This is like the Metamorphosis. Yeah. We're not doing well with these definite articles. Between The Call of Wild and now The Metamorphosis.
Yes. The Metamorphosis by Kafka.
This is a book I have never read, like most of these. So I obviously was familiar with it. Well, not obviously, but I was familiar with it. I knew it was by Kafka. And I kind of knew, it's not spoilery, it's in literally the first sentence of the book, but I knew a dude turned into a bug, and that was kind of the extent of what I knew about the book.
Unlike the last book that you did not know was about a dog. You at least knew this was about a bug.
I knew it had a dog. That was...
Yeah. And like you said, the very first sentence, we get right into it. When Gregor Samsa woke up one morning from unsettling dreams, he found himself changed in his bed into a monstrous vermin. So, vermin as in beetle-like or I keep thinking of a cockroach instead of like a beetle. But either way, whichever way you go, he's turned into a giant bug.
Right. I think the only thing it really says about him is he has many legs and a rounded back. Those are kind of the two things.
Yeah.
And he's able to turn his head from side to side. So I am not an entomologist. Entomologist, right? That's bugs.
Yes.
Etymologist is words. So I'm not an entomologist. So I don't know the articulation of a cockroach's neck versus a beetle's, but obviously Gregor can move around a little bit.
Yeah. And how does we were talking about it before we started recording. How does he feel about getting turned into a bug?
Yeah, so he's actually really quite chill. So Gregor, so let's just very quickly, this is a very short book, so I think we can summarize this first section. Hopefully you all have read it or have listened to one episode back in your podcast feed to Meredith's rendition of the first 1.5 chapters of this short read. But in a nutshell, or in a carapace perhaps, Gregor Samsa wakes up, he's a bug, doesn't really know what to make of it, and skips work. His boss sends over someone to check on him. His family all kind of freaks out a little bit, and eventually they come to some level of acceptance and start feeding him. So I think that kind of summarizes where we are in the middle of chapter 2.
You say he skips work. He can't physically get to work because he's a bug now.
He
can barely get out of bed.
This is true. So we said, he wakes up as a bug and he's kind of chill about the whole thing, tries to go back to sleep, but he does find that he doesn't know how to use his many little legs as they're kicking in the air as he's on his back.
It's so gross and creepy. I hate things with so many legs. Our house has house centipedes, which I think that we just used to call them thousand-leggers until I found out their real name. And they're apparently really good. Like, they eat tons of other bugs. They don't bother people, except they're so leggy. They've got 36 legs or something insane, and they get so big. And every now and then they show up and I can't take it. Spiders, cool, whatever. Ants, whatever.
I'm not a spider guy.
Stink bugs, all right, I'll get rid of it. But the thousand-legger house centipedes, ugh. I can't handle it.
I thought you said they had 36. That's quite a fewer than 1,000.
I'm an English person, not math. So
okay.
36 feels like 1,000 when it comes to insect legs. So,
well, I think we've hit upon the first lesson of the Metamorphosis is you want to always be a stomach or side sleeper. If you're a back sleeper and you wake up transformed into vermin, you're stuck. You can't really move, as Gregor finds out.
No. But once he flips over, he finds that suddenly his little legs all work together and he can actually move quite well the way he's supposed to move, right? But it takes him a while to accept because he tries to stand up. He wants to work the doorknob. He's trying to convince himself and the rest of the family, no, I'm fine. I'm going to catch the next train. He's more concerned with actually getting to work than he is with the fact that he's been transformed into a cockroach.
Right. So we mentioned that Gregor doesn't get to work. He tries, He is a traveling salesman, so he was supposed to wake up early and catch the 5 o'clock train, 6 o'clock train. I can't remember, but it was a very early train. As someone who has done quite a bit of business travel over the past few years, the thought of catching your mode of transportation at that ungodly hour, no. I always made my first flight around 11 or 12.
That sounds like you.
I was not catching the 6 o'clock flights anywhere that I was going.
Once I took a red eye, once from Vegas back to Philly, because that's what Ben booked and he thought it would be a great idea. And then I went to work, which was in my house, but still, I fell asleep on the desk at some point during the day. And I could hear Ben snoring in the room down the hall because it was horrible, absolutely horrible to catch a 6 a.m. flight. So I feel Gregor in that. I get it, you missed the flight, but wanted like that desire to go back with everything else that's going on. Maybe it's just his way of not accepting it, because if I go to work and if I'm normal and everyone treats me normal, then this is fine. This is fine, right?
He can work through it, sure. Yeah.
And you mentioned they send the manager to his house. So this is like some serious, if we miss work, nobody's going to be sent to our home to find us. Maybe they'll call if you don't call in, but nobody's going to knock on
not
your door.
only is he supposed to catch a very, very early train, but his company has someone watching the train station to ensure that he gets on the train, so that for them to even know that he has missed the train.
Yeah. Weird. Creepy.
So that kind of brings up one thing I wanted to talk about a little bit, is his employment, or the state of the world that he's in. So we should probably mention, this is not an American book.
Right.
Kafka is not an American.
No.
Right.
He was born in what's now Prague.
Which is a very nice city. I've been to Prague. I recommend it.
Jealous.
Czech Republic is lovely.
And his father's actually, this might be why they're watching him though, his father's in debt to his boss in some way. I don't know how
This
much.
is true.
But his father hasn't worked in 5 years. His father's business failed. And I think partially what Gregor is doing is not only is he the sole provider for his family, which is his mom, his dad, and his sister, who's like 16-ish.
Which is more motivation for him to get up and get to work,
Right.
I think.
But he's also paying back some sort of debt in a way. So I don't know if he gets all his wages or what happens, but they are definitely watching him, because partly, I think, because the family's indebted to the company, or to at least the boss.
Right. So this made me think of a few things. First, I don't know what sort of sales was going on in, Czech Republic at the time that Kafka was living, or what the economic situation was. I guess it would be communist days, wouldn't it? This is back when they were a republic of the Soviet Union, wouldn't it? This is 50s, 40s. When was this written?
Oh, this is way earlier than that. Are you talking 18
earlier.
or are you talking 19s?
Oh, I was thinking 19.
Well, Kafka's dead by 1924.
Oh, okay. So this is way back.
Yeah.
All right. So scratch all that. I am also not a history major, so I have no idea what was going on in whatever was pre-Czechoslovakia. I mean, this isn't even Czechoslovakia. This is, I don't know what the Czech lands were called way back when.
Bohemia.
You can tell we don't do any deep research on the authors. It's not my role in this podcast.
That's because you're asleep.
Anyway, the things I was thinking about, what sort of business is this that his father is in? Because it feels very mafia mob-like, right? Like the father owes money to the business and the boss is paying it back. So that was one sort of question. Secondly, Gregor, this traveling salesman position apparently is fairly lucrative and prestigious within the company, because he mentions working his way up to that point as a salesman or a junior associate in the company, and then eventually becoming on sort of the traveling team and going out and doing his thing. So it's lucrative enough that not only is he, it's mentioned a little bit later, but not only is he paying off the debt and supporting his family, but he's also putting a little bit of money away, because once he's unable to work, his dad is able to dip into the savings that he's kind of socked away, because he's been planning to send his sister off to conservatory in a few years. So at least accumulating enough to get to that point. And they employ people in the family. There's at least, I could not tell if it was one or two, because it mentions a maid who runs screaming from the house, apparently never to return. But they also make mention of a housekeeper, I guess, who's fixing meals.
Yeah, cook, like they have a cook that has agreed to do the work as long as she is like confined fully to the kitchen and she will never come out. And it was unclear to me whether she was new post maid running away or if she had always been there and knows what happened and therefore she said, I'll stay, but I'm never coming out of this kitchen.
Right. Yeah, I was unclear as well as if she was long-term or was a new hire in order to help with the new Gregor situation.
Yeah.
But either way, his job was lucrative enough that it took care of the family, put away savings, and was able to employ domestic servants at some level.
Yeah. And I'm going to talk about his family a little bit, but first I'm going to say I just Googled it. 1915 is when this was published for the first time. So little recognition, though, did this book receive till after Kafka died, as is true of many quote-unquote great artists. But the family, so we've got dad, mom, sister, and we've already talked about the dad a little bit, and you mentioned he wants to send his sister to the conservatory, and it's a surprise. It's like going to be her Christmas gift, and he's been saving money. She plays the violin, and they don't have many luxuries, but he really cares for his sister, and I can see why. I mean, they're wonderful people. Sisters should be cared for. And given
well,
things.
I was going to say he's obviously quite a few years older than she is because it mentions she's only 17 at this point and he's already worked his way up to whatever level in the company. So I figured he's probably, mid to late 20s is what I was picturing for his age.
Yeah, I think that's probably right. But she is the only one who really cares for him at this point. In the beginning, he finds himself turned into a bug and he's trying to talk and he can't talk and it comes out. If he concentrates, he can say yes or no. But if he goes off into a long rambling speech, it comes out just as monstrous nonsense and nobody can understand him, though he can understand them. He gets the door open and everybody sees him and they're terrified. The manager runs screaming, falling down the banister. The maid runs away, never to return, as you said. Mom is so scared she spills the coffee all over the floor. Dad has a newspaper and a cane in one hand, and he's like, back in your room, beast. And he does go back in his room, and his sister brings him like a kitten. She brings him a bowl of milk with a piece of bread floating in it, which I don't know. Is that like an official meal?
A thing, I guess.
And he finds suddenly his favorite drink he no longer likes. So not only is he physically transformed into a bug on the outside, but he doesn't like the things he liked as a human. He starts to think and act like a bug, which I'm sure we'll get into in a little bit. But his sister cares for him. She brings him food. She brings him a variety of food to see what he might like.
I'll say she's pretty sharp. He rejects the milk, and so she quickly gets a variety of things, some table scraps and garbage as well as fresh food, and he immediately goes to the old scrap food.
Yeah, like old cheese.
Cheese.
And he finds himself very comfortable and happy hiding under the couch, which that's where his sister is comfortable and happy with him being because she's terrified of him. And she comes into his room every day. She opens the windows. And a month goes by the end of this reading, the end of the section. And she still isn't used to it, to the point where he thought maybe she would be. So he was just chilling by the window. And she comes in and just starts screaming and slams the door and locks it. So Gregor, being the nice brother that he is, hides under the couch, but he also pulls a sheet over the couch to fully cover himself so she can't see any part of him. It takes him 4 hours to get this sheet over the couch. So they clearly care for each other a lot. And then she continues to feed him, and we'll see her care for him in the next section as well. But I think that so far that's the deepest and best relationship that we've seen in this at all, because his parents are pretty quiet about it. They don't talk to him. His mom has not come to see him in a month. She doesn't want to see him. I guess she wouldn't want to see. I mean, she does want to see him, That's not true. She does like yell and implore, like, it's my boy. I need to see my boy. And they're like, look, lady, you do not want to see.
There's no boy left.
Yeah. And there really isn't.
So the parents don't really get a lot of description per se. I don't really have a picture of his mom other than sort of huddling in the kitchen. But this transformation of his has severely affected the family. It mentions that none of them will go out and leave the house empty. Someone always has to be awake or around at all times. So it's almost, it's a good book to read during the pandemic where we're all kind of stuck at home and changing our own, daily habits and routines. But it's completely thrown the family off. So they've completely readjusted their life to this reality of this thing living in Gregor's room.
Yeah. And I thought of the pandemic immediately especially because he just wakes up one day and this has happened. Now, while it wasn't that abrupt, in some aspects, for me anyway, we saw the pandemic coming and the news every day getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And I sat in my office, my home office, thinking, well, everybody's lives are changing, but mine isn't. I already work from home. I do a job that's fully remote. I never go anywhere anyway, very often. So really, this is fine. This is all just happening around me. And then suddenly, all of us at my job got the saddest news we've ever gotten is that we have to all be laid off now. And it made sense that was true. But suddenly it was like everything I was building towards and working towards and everything that was my career and my life was suddenly gone. And would it return? I don't know. I still don't know. And the world was suddenly that one day like fully changed. And I did not see that coming simply because of the way that, I already worked from home. Nobody I knew was sick. And in Philly, it's more prevalent than in where you are down south. And in the surrounding Philly area, we've had some of the highest cases. But Gregor lays in bed, like waiting for everything just to go back to normal. And that feeling, I think, now and in other parts.
It's relatable, I think.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
There are definitely times when you wake up in the morning and you're just like, I'm just going to pull the covers over my head and go back to sleep.
Yeah.
I guess the difference is Gregor could see his new rounded body with tiny little legs, so I guess
and see them not going back to normal.
And not exactly. So I think he could kind of figure out more quickly that this isn't going to just change with sleep.
Yeah. It's that weird period of time where if time were tangible, the thing that changed your life is so new that the way life was feels very physically close. You could almost like, I'm just going to go back. I've had that feeling when like a friend has passed away or something like that. Like, if I could just jump one step backwards, it's like right there. The old way is right there, but it is an impassable barrier because you can't go back in time. This isn't Tralfamadore, if anybody's read Kurt Vonnegut's Slaughterhouse-Five. And maybe... No. Anyway... Google it, Tralfamadore, and the way they think about time. It's something I wish were true. But then you just have to move forward, despite how physically close the old feeling or the old life feels. At this point in the book, and I feel like at this point for me in the pandemic, it's been a month for Gregor. It's been like 6 to 8 weeks for us. This feels like a weird new normal. And
sliding into acceptance.
Yeah.
So...
Yeah.
Which is something I wanted to mention with the book is, and you kind of touched on it earlier, is in the beginning, he is sort of fighting against it, right? He's still trying to stand upright. He's trying to get to his dresser. He's trying to move around the room, manipulate the door handle with his mouth, things like that. But as he accepts being this new form, this new vermin, he finds that he can move quicker and he can actually scurry about, and he's learning his body. He apparently heals very quickly because it mentions that he falls out of bed and bruises his bottom portion, whatever his thorax or whatever, is on the end of the bug. And eventually it heals quickly because the next morning he feels fine. And And so
Yeah.
it's just, he sort of gets the hang of being this new thing.
And we know he heals quickly because he compares it to when he had like cut his finger weeks prior as a human, and it was still hurting him just the day before or something. And in 24 hours, he feels so much better. So
Right.
I think in some way his human life or world or thoughts start to fade because his senses in that way are starting to fade. He can't see very well now, even things that are close. And he enjoys, like, as we said, the different food. He enjoys scurrying about. He likes being under the couch. And I think it's important to bring up a term that a lot of people probably have heard thrown about, which is Kafkaesque. This is where it comes from. Kafka.
This is.
The official definition is...
I mean, this book specifically or his body of work?
His body of work and the things that he writes about and the way that he writes. So if something is called Kafkaesque, which maybe you've heard that referred to in this global pandemic world, is characteristic or reminiscent of the oppressive or nightmarish qualities of Franz Kafka's fictional world. And what I think Metamorphosis is, it's not necessarily oppressive, but definitely nightmarish to wake up as a bug. But it's also...
I find it oppressive. So two things that I would associate with oppressive in this world. Me personally, I'm an introvert and a very sort of quiet person. Two things that really freaked me out. One was the sort of the nanny state of the company that he works for, right? Being watched. Like, I having experience, I said as a business traveler, I would absolutely have hated that if, say, work called me the morning of a flight. Are you on the flight yet? Or if you left? Like, that would really annoy me. But the second thing, I think, sort of a lesser thing that really, on a personal level, like I had a visceral reaction to, his bedroom has at least 2, possibly 3 doors, because it mentions that the dad is at one door and he can hear his sister at another door. So he's got at least 2 doors leading into his bedroom. And that would totally freak me out personally. Like, I want to have complete control of access to my space. I don't want to have multiple entry points into my room. That would give me anxiety. I was getting queasy just reading that personally.
Well, I know that the one door is like a double swinging door, so like maybe like French doors or something like that. And when he opens one, he can't get out.
Right.
And
he peeks around the one side. Yeah.
But if he were to open both, then he could get out and move freely. I guess you're right. It is pretty in that way. It's pretty oppressive. In that,
and apparently the one door leads directly to his sister's room, which I think we have some experience in that, and I hated. By the way, I'm sorry if your house has bedrooms that connect directly.
Yeah.
That is the most miserable way.
That was weird.
So when we were in high school, my bedroom was a back bedroom that I could only access by going through my sister's room.
You were
that
in high
is
school.
Not ideal.
I was in middle school.
I was in high school. That is not ideal setup for a house.
Really? Were you there that long? It was when you graduated. Yeah.
A year and a half,
I guess.
Senior year and part of junior year, yeah.
Yeah, it's a good thing you didn't really have any friends. Nobody came over.
This is very true. That would have been extra awkward. I did a lot of comic book reading that year, sitting on the floor of my bedroom. I will tell you that.
Yeah.
Anyway.
And mom and dad's room connected to my room, but they put like a dresser, because mom and dad's room had a door inside my room and in the hallway, but they put my dresser and their dresser maybe, or their TV table in front of the door because they didn't want their kids just going into their room.
It's just super weird.
It was a really weird house.
I hated that place.
Yeah.
So anyway, so oppressive. Those two things I found extremely oppressive and, partially anxiety-inducing for my own experiences and memories.
Well, Kafkaesque continues on to be some sub-definitions of nightmarishly complex, bizarre, and illogical, which that part of the definition fully connected to the way I've been feeling for a number of years, since about 2016, November-ish, give or take. bizarre and illogical, but especially now with this pandemic, not necessarily because it happened and there is a virus and a sickness that biologically isn't illogical. That makes sense. People who study that saw that coming. What I find bizarre and illogical are the reactions of certain people, not necessarily very many, because if you look at polls, a lot of people are doing the right thing, but like protesters who, on the steps of capitals with their assault rifles, and they don't want to wear masks, and they think that, whoever dies should die and it's not that big of a deal, or they don't believe it's happening, and there's anti-vaxxers, and that is literally illogical to me. I can't figure it out, despite the fact, like, part of me also believes everyone has their right to their own opinions and beliefs, and then part of me is like, nope, no, they don't. No, they don't. They do not, because you're coughing in or around the vicinity of me and my child, and you're being absurd. So in that way, the way we live right now does feel a little Kafkaesque in my way that I can't think myself through to it making sense. And I know I'm not the only one.
Certainly not. It's a strange time we live in, that is for sure. And it's been a bizarro world for a few years. So.
But at least we're people. At least we're still human, I think.
We are. I do not have many legs. Although I will say I feel less of a person now that my, the daily routines have been altered and going through sort of that same thing that Gregor goes through, that sort of quiet acceptance of, well, this is just how it is. I think we're still, at least for me, on the front edge of not when he first wakes up and just wants to go back to bed. Obviously, I know that's not going to happen, but he's trying to stand and still be a person in bug form. So I haven't quite given up on, these are the things I used to do. Who knows when I'll ever get to do them again? So now I have to change my habits and accept my new armored carapace and small legs.
Yeah. Thinking about, like, I know the gym is really important to you and working out. If
I have no idea when I would feel comfortable going back to the gym.
That was going to be my question. Not when will you be quote unquote allowed by your state, but when would you feel comfortable going back?
Right. Even if they opened up gyms next week, which, our neighboring state of Georgia is opening gyms this week or last week. I personally don't feel comfortable going to one for who knows how long. So I'm going to start assembling a small home gym, which I've resisted doing for the past 6 to 8 weeks, because there's that hope that, maybe they'll reopen, or maybe but no, I don't know. No way I would go back right now until there's a vaccine.
Yeah. I think that's the thing for me, is the vaccine. Once we get that, I'll feel more comfortable. Like, my son was signed up for summer camp at his preschool, and I was like, no.
Yeah.
And now I'm not even sure about fall preschool, because I can teach him letters. I can do a really good job. Sure. I am an educator. As much as I want him to have interaction with kids, and he misses his friends, and he likes his teachers, and all of that's wonderful. But he was so sick from January until February, and then getting over it in March when we went on lockdown, just from being around regular germs. He was so sick. It's the healthiest he's been all year because we're on lockdown. So I'm not ready to put him back in until there's a vaccine. Even if they take 50% fewer students, what are they going to do? 3-year-olds aren't going to keep a mask on. They're not going to not share snot. It's just what they do. And I'm not ready for it until there's a vaccine. I'm curious as to whether or not, I have read this book, but I don't remember the ending. So it's like discovering it again for a second time. What happens to Gregor? There's no vaccine.
Which is the beauty of these books being classics, is they are enjoyable to read multiple times.
Yeah, and they connect so much with the now, whatever the now is, from 1915 to 2020. We're still making connections and getting visceral reactions to a completely absurd premise of being turned into a bug. I know that you're a big sci-fi fantasy person. Does this fit in that realm for you?
Being turned into a bug or living in the now?
Obviously not living in the now, I don't think. No, being turned into a bug. The idea in this story that it's not really magic realism. Maybe it is. It doesn't really feel like magic, but this premise of suddenly being a bug.
I think that's sort of the disorienting, or what adds to the disorientation of this story, is we don't have, you would think what do you think of high fantasy or even in sort of science fiction, there's an explanation, right? There's the wizard that casts the spell that turns. Why is Gregor a bug? He's just a traveling salesman dude, right? Like he's not on. This book doesn't set him off on some high fantasy quest, I don't believe. We have 30 or so pages left. He's not going to slay some giant enemy at the end of this. He's just suddenly he's a bug and that's it. And we're going to move on. And there's no explanation, right? Like I don't expect Kafka to give us an explanation. I think that adds to the disorientation that he feels and that we feel as the reader.
I think that's a really good point that I hadn't thought of. I don't read a lot of fantasy or sci-fi, not a lot, some, but like just comparing it to Lord of the Rings, like there's a huge backstory and a whole world and everything makes sense confined to that world. And if anything, if a monster truck were to suddenly drive through the Shire, that would break everything, and this absurd thing happening in that world wouldn't fit the confines. But here we are in the quote-unquote normal world. We have this bizarre thing happening, no explanation, no purpose, really.
Right, which I think this could be, this is where having a literary historian would be interesting. 1915, this is pre what we think of the modern era of sci-fi and fantasy. So I don't think people were exposed to books like this back then, right? So, it's not like Samsa had a wealth of other fantasy novels where he would even...
Kafka.
Or Kafka, not Sam, where Kafka would even connect with, having a larger world or a reason for this, or, that's not what he's going for. He's not going for an adventure story or even a bizarre magic story. He's trying to say something else with this, strange, inciting incident of Gregor waking up as a bug.
Yeah. And that's why this book and Kafka are classic, because there wasn't anything before, and he is part of the movement or the writers or the early books that created it. In the beginning of my book with the introduction, he wasn't, people didn't have anything like this at the time, and they were like, ugh. And it wasn't well received at the time. The introduction says he became the body, when he died, he became the body of works that has created our modern awareness. So this book played into what we think of the modern period of literature, which was about to happen a couple of years later.
Right.
But it was much more well received later on. Once the books got traction and people started reading them and appreciating them, and they stand the test of time despite the fact not being appreciated the moment it was published. This isn't Harry Potter, right? People did not line up to get the Metamorphosis when it came out. So I'm excited and anxious to see what happens in the second part once he perhaps starts to accept, because we end with he lifted his head to see how his sister was taking the new arrangement, which refers to him being hidden under the sheet and she doesn't have to see him and all of that. But this is a fully new arrangement for all of them in total, not just the sheet over the couch. So,
right. Which I can only imagine what the family's thinking. Their source of income is gone. They don't, once again, this is not a fantasy story where they can go out on some quest and heal him from his state. There's just now a giant bug living in his bedroom. I'm actually kind of interested that I guess he spoke and they sort of understood, so maybe they put the two together, but why they immediately jumped to this is Gregor as opposed to this giant creature ate Gregor or something like that,
yeah.
Like they immediately were like, oh yeah, Gregor's a bug now. That's great. Yeah. I guess because he's living in Gregor's room. They're like, oh, all right.
And his door was locked?
And he did talk. He did sort of say, "Oh, I'm getting up and going to work now."
He was able to speak some short sentences, like some yes and some no, and actually have it come out, despite the fact that it didn't really sound like his regular voice.
Right. In the beginning, anyway. As we finish this section, he's unable to speak, I think, is what we sort of left with.
Yeah. Yeah, and that means that they have no idea if he can understand them. We don't know what bugs hear.
Right.
You know?
Right.
So
maybe they're listening. That's how they always know where to find me.
God. That's why they fall on me while I'm sleeping.
So the only other kind of note that I had for this section was adding to the bizarreness and the disorientation that we sort of touched on already, is the book's a little non-linear. Like, it does jump around a little bit, where it'll talk, after Gregor had been doing this for a month, and then it'll kind of jump back to at sort of the 2-week point. And so there are sort of little vignettes that are non-linear through this that add, I think, to the reader's disorientation as we're going through.
And why do you think, you brought up that word a few times, why do you think this disorientation is so key?
I think because it mirrors what's going through, from the reader's perspective, what Gregor's going through. It allows us to connect with him a little more viscerally. Like, if we're disoriented, like, what is going on with this book, that lets us feel his feelings of, oh, I'm a bug and I don't know what's happening.
Yeah. I think from his point of view, he is our narrator, or at least our narrator is inside his head. And we're not inside his father's head or the manager or his sister's head or anything like that. We are inside Gregor's head.
Yeah.
And he seems to have a relatively good grip on time. He can say it was now a month or 2 weeks after the change or whatever. And while we're disoriented, it doesn't seem that he himself, or at least our narrator, can help walk us through that time, even though it isn't linear. I feel like life isn't linear right now. I don't know what day it is.
No, it all sort of blends together at this point.
It blends together, and I just continually cross things off the calendar and have no idea how to schedule things or what a weekend is anymore. But it's, again, another good comparison to perhaps how Gregor feels, despite the fact that our narrator knows where we are in time.
So any other thoughts before we wrap this one up?
I just really like it. It's a quick read.
It is a very quick read. So if you haven't read it, please go ahead, grab it, download it, read it, or go back an episode and listen to us read it to you. And it's actually really quick.
Yeah, it's great. I'm excited for the next half.
Which tomorrow you will find the second half in your podcast feed. Yep. So listen along, and next week we will wrap up the end half of Metamorphosis. So if you like our show, please subscribe, rate and review us on Apple Podcasts. Let us know how we're doing. Follow us on Twitter and Instagram. You can find us at CYSTpod. Join the discussion on our Facebook page, Classics You Slept Through. And you can also send us an email, cystpod@gmail.com.
Awesome. Yeah.
So until next week, this has been Classics You Slept Through. Cafeteria's got Salisbury steak today. Let's go.